It's wonderful to see everybody. Thank you, Rav Avi, so much for your time today. We're really honored to welcome you here for our Jofa at Home program. And just to, I know people, know Rav Avi. He's a legend in our world, but I just wanted to give him a formal introduction. He's one of the most beloved and visionary leaders in the open Orthodox Judaism world. He's the founder, senior rabbi emeritus of HIR, the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale, fondly known as the Bayit, and he's also the founder of both Yeshivat Chovei Torah and Yeshivat Maharat, of which we have a few Bogrot, alums, and current students on the call. His lifelong commitment to expanding women's voices and leadership in Orthodox life make him a natural and cherished partner for us here at Jofa. And I'll also share that Rav Avi holds a very special place in my heart. He's a longtime family friend. He was my father's chavruta. It's a personal joy and honor to welcome here today. As with Pesach just around the corner, a little bit too soon, we couldn't think of a more perfect way to prepare than by learning with Rav Avi from his brand new Haggadah Yihi Or, Let There Be Light. As a teacher, an activist, and a spiritual guide who's inspired generations of Jews to engage more deeply and more boldly with their tradition, we know that he will illuminate our Seder tables in a whole new way this year. We're so grateful to have him here, and we can't wait to learn from him today. Ravi, before we start, I just wanted to take 1 minute for all of our Jofa at Home participants who are here with us today to just quickly introduce themselves and say where they're from, really just, your name and where you're from, and then we will hand it off to Ravi. So please, we can start with Miriam. Go ahead.
Hey, I'm Miriam Smirnov. I'm from Sharon, Massachusetts, just south of Boston.
All right,
We're
Leora.
gonna lose
No.
Jordy now.
Mm,
Jordy is Jordy Safa,
mm.
right? Isn't Jordan your?
Yeah, at the school.
Right,
Yeah.
he's at the school, exactly. He's head of Shas.
I'm the only one who can call Jordan Jordy.
I'll tell him you said so.
Did you choose a successor yet?
I'm sorry.
Did you choose a successor yet?
Not as far as I'm aware. That is a great question. And he will be a big loss. The kids love him.
Well, he's one of the greatest in America today. Great educator.
I will absolutely pass that on.
All right, Leora, go ahead. Let us know. Introduce yourself and where you're from, please.
Hi, I'm Leora, and I'm based in Fairlawn, New Jersey.
Wendy.
Hi, I'm Wendy Lefko-Messeloff, and I'm from Cleveland, Ohio.
Katrine.
Hello, I'm Katrin from East Germany, or Germany in general.
And then we also have Marianne and Carmela, who are our board co-presidents with us, and then Jordana and Sarah from the Jofa staff on the call. All right, Rav Avi, the floor is yours.
Didn't
Go
you
ahead.
know that in Germany, Rebecca Blady is there? Do you know Rebecca?
Yes, I worked for over 4 years with her. She was my boss.
Uh-huh. Are they staying or are they thinking of leaving?
Oh, it's complicated, I would say, but they really love Berlin. And they are members actually of my community here in Leipzig. Not in
I
Berlin, but
see.
here, because it's so lovely here.
Right. And Cleveland, of course. Ramey Smith is from Cleveland. Do you know Ramey?
Yes, of course, very well.
Noah
Yeah.
Levitt is from there. And
Mm-hmm.
I used to go into Cleveland in the 90s when Demjanya came back to Seven Hills
Yes, I remember it well.
and got very, very close to that community. Beautiful community.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my general approach is it's hard to begin learning without melody, without song. So this is a nigun that I wrote a few years ago, and it's taken from Tilim, from a beautiful phrase that some recite every morning, Ba'orcha nireh or. And the title of this Haggadah is Yehi Or. It reached its final stages in and around October 7th, 2023, and that was a dark day. But yet it was a day when in Israel, Simchat Torah, on the same day as Shmini Atzeret, we ended but started the Torah, which describes V'choshech al pnei tahom vayom Elokim Yehi Or. And the headquarters for the meaning of a word or a text or a concept is the first time it's mentioned in the Torah. And God's first words was, no matter how dark, Yehi Or, and human beings are empowered to partner with God, to co-create with God, to make this world in Am Yisrael a better world in the spirit of Yehi Or. So light means to do all we can to improve the lives of others, ourselves and others, especially the most vulnerable. Am Yisrael and Medinat Yisrael and Kol Olam Kulo. And so this is the Nigun. Nigun Or, a melody of light. How we all need light. The light of God, the light of Torah or Torah, the light of Israel and Zion, or Chadash al Zion Ta'ir, light for the world, a light of love, our inner light, reflective of the light of God, God's love. Le David, Hashem Ori, the Lord is our light. May we see that light, and may the blessings that I give to our grandchildren who are serving now in Tzahal, to them and to all those in Tzahal, Adonai Yishmor Tzeitcha Uvo'echa Me'ata V'ad Olam. May God protect their going out and coming in forever and ever. There's so much to focus on in the Haggadah, and so I'd like to say a few words about the story of the Exodus of Yetziat Mitzrayim. The Haggadah is divided by the Shulchan Orech to that part which precedes the meal, which deals with the past story, and that which follows the meal, beginning with the last thing we eat, the Afikomen, which jettisons us into the future. And more particularly, the part before the meal has different sections. There's a section of storytelling where we tell the story as told by Shmuel and Rav in Arvei Pesachim, in the Talmud Pesachim. And that's followed by a learning segment where we interpret exegetically, following the Midrash or our own Midrash, 4 psukim which summarize the Exodus from Parshat Kitavo. And then there's the section of the actual reenactment where we're saying Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, because the Exodus story is not only the story of that event and the learning in depth about that event, but reenacting the event. And the 4th subsection of this part of the Haggadah before the meal is Hoda'ah, where we offer a thanksgiving. There is no greater sense of shlemut, of wholeness, than one who can offer thanksgiving, often for that which we have, which we too often take for granted. So given that general scenario, we're zeroing in on the past story, but the second of the 2 stories. So it's the first of the 4 subsections in Magid. And it reads, Mitchila Ovdei Avodah Zarah,
I'm going to share.
Hayu Avotenu. In the beginning, our fathers, our mothers, they served idols. Ve'achshav kirvanu hamakom la'avodato. But now the omnipresence has brought us close to his worship. That's how Rav begins the story. Now, it's very different than Shmuel's story. Shmuel's story was a story of Avadim hayinu lifaro b'Mitzrayim, vayotzienu Hashem misham. We were slaves, and God took us out of Egypt. So one wonders, how is Rav's story any different? And indeed, it does expand on Shmuel's story, as it stresses in the first line, the second line, it stresses spirituality. Shmuel focuses on Avadim Hayinu. We were slaves, we were physical slaves, and then we were freed. Rav enters into a different domain. We were once idol worshippers, speaking not only of a physical servitude, but a kind of a spiritual limitation. V'achshav kirvanu hamakom lavodoto. But now God has brought us close to serve him, probably receiving to Mamad Har Sinai, receiving the Torah. In one word, for Rav, Yitziat Mitzrayim, redemption is not only freedom from, but freedom to proactively carve out a new mission, receiving and then sharing the Torah's message of ethical monotheism with Israel and the world. And that is the normative way of understanding how Shmuel is broader than Rav's message. Rav is the physical redemption, and Shmuel is focusing on the spiritual. Rav is the clarion call during the Soviet Jewry movement of Shalach et Ami, let my people go. But Shmuel adds the word Shalach et Ami v'avduni, let my people go, for a purpose. You know, when one thinks about this, to stand up physically against an enemy is a reactive presentation of one's Jewish identity. In Mitzrayim, we reacted against the anti-Semitism of Egypt, and we were freed. But if one to this day identifies Judaism with what one is fighting against and nothing more, that's what I call againstnik Judaism, as important as it is. That is a Judaism which is defined by what I'm reacting against. And anything that remains a reaction will not endure. The key is to turn that which is reactive Judaism into a proactive Judaism. Proactive Judaism will endure. And there are, thank God, many Jews who did not identify with Judaism at all, but on October 7th, 2023, there was a spark, like that video of the holy Jew who was tattooed from head to toe. And he gets on his podcast and he says, I want to thank Hamas. They were the ones who lit my fire, who reminded me that I am Jewish. And it has its value. It's very important to stand up strong against anti-Semitism. My contention as a rabbi activist is that there are many people who are afraid to stand up against anti-Semitism, fearful of what the reaction would be. And therefore, standing up against anti-Semites, that's to be lauded. But if that becomes the sum total of my Judaism, something's missing. It will not last. Things last when I'm not only defining myself by what I'm fighting against, by the need that inspired me to create something new, but I also know how I can turn a reaction into something which is proactive. I remember when Chovevei Torah started, when Yeshivat Marat started, they did start as a reaction. But if it remained a reaction and we didn't understand more positively, and what do we stand for, if the mission remains a negative and doesn't become a positive, then it will not last for long. Betchila uvdei avodah zara hayu avotenu, v'achshav kirvanu hamakom lavodato. The expansion of infusing spirituality into the Exodus experience. And it continues. Shenema vayome Yehoshua el kol ha'am. As Yoshua said to the people. And right there, one perhaps should stop, because one wonders if, in fact, I want to recall a story of the Exodus, I should be quoting from Sefer Shmot. Why am I quoting from Sefer Yehoshua? The same question can be asked when we get into that learning phase of Tseu Lamad. The 4 psukim that are explicated come from Parshat Kitavo, what the farmer said when bringing the bikurim, the first fruits, and one wonders, why does that become the text? To learn the Exodus story, why are we not choosing from Sefer Shemot as it was unfolding? But we're centering our attention on the Rav response, on the story of Rav. Why are we quoting from Sefer Yehoshua? And here, perhaps one could suggest the following, and let me just as an addendum add that it's okay for one to look at liturgy and it's okay for one to look at ritual, and based upon one's personal experiences and the current events of one's time, to offer one's personal thoughts on what is being said. Indeed, this liturgy speaks to contemporary times. V'achshav kirvanu hamakom lavodato. Now God has brought us closer to his service. Shenema vayoma Yoshua el kol ha'am. Why quote from the book of Joshua, not from the Chumash? Because unlike Sefer Shemot, Yoshua's speech is given after the settling of Eretz Yisrael. It comes from the end of Sefer Yoshua, Perek Chav Daled. Here, Rav makes clear that built into the story of the Exodus is the centrality of Israel. You know, there are many who claim that Israel, the centrality of Israel, is not important, certainly not centrally important to the Pesach story. Pesach is Yitziat Mitzrayim. Sukkot, the Rambam writes in the Moreh Nevuchim, that centers on Eretz Yisrael, the Lulav and the Etrog, and what have you. This Haggadah sees it differently, that built into the story of the Exodus, from the get-go, is the centrality of Israel. And so when one reads the text, V'achshav kirvanu hamakom lavodato, now God has brought us close to serving him. Yes, it could be lavodato, to the service of God in Yerushalayim, in the Bet HaMikdash, but lavodato could mean Har Sinai, lavodat Hashem, but it could also mean lavodato, that God brought us into Israel, into Yerushalayim, to the Bet HaMikdash to serve the Lord. This speaks to the centrality of Israel in the Exodus story. And here I want to say something about, it's almost an adjunct, but it's important, because what we have here in these two stories is a reflection of the 3 fundamental pillars of Judaism. First, let me tell you what those pillars are. We as a Jewish people, we are not only a people, we are a people, but we are also a religion, we are a faith. And not only are we a people and a faith, but we are also a nation. And nations have a land that they call their own. And when one looks at these two stories as a composite, these 3 pillars are accentuated. Shmuel is accentuating our physically becoming a people. Avadim ayinu lifaro. Avadim hayinu b'Mitzrayim, leFaro b'Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and we became a people. But here, Rav is expanding. We were idol worshippers, and now God brought us to Sinai, as we said before. Not only freedom from, but freedom to. We stood at Sinai, and from Sinai, the Torah comes. So one of the fundamental pillars of Judaism is we are Jews. A second fundamental pillar is we are a religion. We are a faith. And as we are explaining now, the support text is from Sefer Yehoshua when we had settled the land. Because we are not only a people, we are not only a faith, not only a religion, we are a nation. We are an Am Yisrael Chai, and nations are inextricably bound to land. V'achshav kirvanu hamakom lavodato. And all three of these pillars are coming together in these two stories. Again, to summarize, Shmuel speaks about our peoplehood, and Rav is adding our faith coming from Sinai to the present time to our understanding that Israel is the national homeland of the Jewish people. And for me, there have been volumes written on anti-Semitism, but as I get older, I like simple. Simple is not simplicity. For me, what anti-Semitism is all about, simple, is any attack on any one of these three pillars is an act of anti-Semitism. And so there are those in recent history, no less than the Nazis themselves. They were attacking Jews because we were Jews, nothing more. When one thinks back to the Crusades, tragically, when Christianity was so anti-Semitic, then the Crusaders were attacking us because of our belief. They were saying, we're not anti-Jewish. All Jews have to do is commit themselves to our faith, to belief in Jesus, and then you're safe. You'll be part of our family. We're not anti-Jewish. They didn't understand if you're anti our faith, that too is an anti-Semitic act. And we're seeing some of that in modern history. The Tucker Carlsons of this world, what are they doing? They're attacking our faith. They are attacking our fundamental belief that we are to this day to blame, not given the great progress made by John Paul II, but they're arguing we're responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus, and it's still part of our sin. But today there's another attack against the Jewish people, and that is those who say, we're very pro-Jewish. We just are against the Jewish people having a right to their own land. That too is an act of anti-Semitism. That is why the great Natan Sharansky, he says you've crossed the line of anti-Zionism and you've become an anti-Semite, not if you disagree with the policy of Netanyahu or Lapid, bevakasha, but if one says we do not have a right as Jews to a Jewish state, you delegitimize Israel as a Jewish state. That is anti-Semitism. Certainly, if it is going to be supported by the demonization of Israel and by looking at Israel and judging Israel with a double standard, what Natan calls the 3 Ds, delegitimization, demonization, and the double standard, saying nothing about the real genocides that are taking place in in China these days and taking place in the Sudan and taking place in Nigeria. That is the real stuff. And so this paragraph expands. Mitchila ovdei avodah zara hayu avotenu. We were worshipers, but now God has drawn us close to his service. It's a spiritual service. That's the dimension that is added. And avodato also, it's a coming into the Jewish homeland, into Medinat Israel, into Yerushalayim. And it's more. The sentence quotes, Vayomer Yehoshua el kol ha'am. And Yehoshua said to all the people, what did he say? Ko amar Adonai Elohei Yisrael. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel. Now we're quoting from Yehoshua. This is another summary of the story. Be'ever hanahar yashvu avotechem me'olam. Now we're getting into the details of the story. It all started with our ancestor, all the way back, Abraham, who was dwelling beyond the river on the other side of the river. Terach avi Avraham vavi Nachor vayavdu Elohim acherim. We begin to tell the story. It begins with that lone voice of Abraham. And here again I want to stop to offer a third point of expansion. Just to summarize, the first point of expansion of Rav was to add the spiritual dimension. The second point of expansion is to add the dimension of the centrality of the land of Israel. And the third point is to say that when one thinks about the beginnings of Judaism, and it's still, there are vestiges of this to the present time, it started with an Abraham and it started with a Sarah who were Me'eva HaNahar, who was on the other side of the river. And here I want to say something about leadership and something about Jofa and something about the Blue Greenbergs, may she be well, of this world. Leadership, the leadership gurus would say, involves identifying a need and doing something about that need, demanding a change. That is not simple to do. It is standing up for a cause. For me, this is the most important principle in spiritual activism, not because it's popular, but it is right. And when one thinks of the great movements of the world, they never, I believe, ever begin from the mainstream. They never begin from the center. Think about Abraham. Think about Sarah, the founders of Judaism, our first and matriarch, our first patriarch. They showed the way by introducing one of the most novel ideas in all of human history, the belief in one God, in the monoistic order. But Abraham, and for that matter Sarah, they were alone in their belief. That's why Abraham is identified as Avraham HaIvri. That's the meaning of the text here. Be'ever hanahar yashvu avotechem me'olam. They were beyond the river. As the rabbis say, Chazal say, Kol ha'olam mitzad echad, the whole world was on one side of the river, but Avraham was on, with Sarah, they were alone on the other side of the river. That's why movements, by definition, begin, and not so much that's why, I haven't explained why, but we've offered the reality that movements begin from the fringe. As a matter of fact, they're so fringy that often there is inevitable resistance. There's resistance to those who are on the fringe, who are calling for change. And that's why Avram comes from Ur Kasdim, the light, the fire of Kasdim. The Medrash says that there were those so upset with Avram that they tried to burn him at the stake. Literally, he was alone, a lone voice, and the resistance was great. Now, why is it so? Why now do movements begin on the fringe? I'll tell you why. Because when you're in the center, when you're in the bureaucracy, that's not where movements begin. As I write in the Haggadah, the establishment is rarely the first to introduce change. This is because change involves taking risks, and the establishment cannot afford to fail. Only becomes involved in courses that they know or they believe there's certitude that they will succeed. Furthermore, the establishment is slow-moving. It's mired in red tape and bureaucracy. It's weighted down by process and committee meetings, often losing touch with the Yamcha, the very people it is serving. This is why change most often begins from those who are not encumbered by establishment constraints, leaders who are outsiders. That's the third expansion. Be'eve hanahar yashvu avotechem me'olam. Think about the modern Zionist movement, Herzl, in the late 19th century. That was a fringe movement when he said, Im tirtzu ein zu agada. Think about the Soviet Jewry movement in 1964 when Glenn Richter and the tzaddik of the movement and Yaakov Birnbaum, who was the father of the movement, and Yitz Greenberg, who was one of the first rabbis to become involved, and Rabbi Shlomo Riskin and Rabbi Haskell Lookstein. They were lone voices. It took the establishment 7 years to organize a nationally funded national organization to help Soviet Jewry. It didn't start on the fringe because that's not the way movements begin. Think about Jofa. It was a movement that was responding to a need that couldn't start from the center and turn that reaction into something which was proactive. Let's think about the IBD, the International Bet Din, that couldn't start with the establishment. It took brave voices like Blues to say, if there is a rabbinic will, there's a halachic way. And Blue is so right, my dear Blue. My mentor is so correct. It's so correct. There is no reason why there should be any aguna today. Built into the halachic system is a possibility of a prenuptial that is much stronger than the very noble efforts that have been taken up to this point, that the community was pushed. It didn't happen on its own. Touché, kol hakavod to those who are more in the mainstream, who put together and publicized the prenuptial agreement. We can go much further. By the way, this is the way leadership works. It's the people on the fringe who begin the movement, and then when it becomes popular enough and the coast is clear, then the establishment jumps in. And that's important. It's very important. Leadership is also making sure that the new idea doesn't remain with the fringe. It's got to be something which is encompassed by everyone. Now, when that happens, it's important for those who are there in the first place, not to have their ideas co-opted. They have to continue in that plane. But it's a very good thing. Not everybody has bought into, for example, rabbis. Marat has now graduated its 100th woman rabbi this past June. Now, it's not as if the OU or the RCA has bought into that. They unfortunately have not. But if I were to think about the movement within the OU and even the RCA on women educators at Stern College and elsewhere, it's the Sarah Horowitzes of this world, it's the Marats of this world who have pushed the envelope and pushed the agenda. It is true about the very, very coming into being of our people. It's true about Yetziat Mitzrayim. In Parshat Shmot, Moshe, after being cajoled by God to go to Paro, so the pasuk says that Moshe convinces with Aaron the Zakanim to come with him to Paro. And then in Perek Hey, the Torah says, Vayavo, not sure the exact text, but it's basically this text, Vayavo Moshe v'Aaron. Moshe and Aaron came before Paro. And the Midrash asks, wait a minute, they just convinced all of the people. Where were the Zakanim? And the Midrash describes how one by one, I know what this feels like, the Zakanim dropped out. And when they arrived at the palace doors, Moshe and Aaron turn around and they say, uh-oh, we're here alone. That's the way it is. That's how the Exodus movement started in Egypt. That's how Am Yisrael took root. That's how the civil rights movement started when Martin Luther King of blessed memory went down south. His black brothers and sisters said to him, Martin, go home. You're a troublemaker. He was a fringe voice that ultimately gained traction and was picked up by the Amcha. That was the message of going back to Vietnam. The anti-war movement started as a fringe movement. It started as a fringe movement and ultimately it became a movement of the masses. And so this is the third point of expansion. Let's review. What's the expansion on Shmuel, who spoke about the physical redemption? Number one, Lavodato, coming to Sinai, freedom not from, only from, but to receive the Torah. Two, Vayome Yehoshua, the pillar, the centrality of Medinat Yisrael. Three, to recognize that this whole movement, it began with those lone voices. And look how Jofa has made a difference. Minde, may you be blessed in your holy work, in your Avodat HaKodesh, just as I am so proud of, if I sound too much like an 82-year-old grandfather, so proud of all the progress that was made. And then we're told a fourth expansion. We're told that it all began be'eva hanaha Yeshua botecha me'olam. But that doesn't begin with Avraham. It begins with Terach. Isn't that strange? You know, in the Medrash, Terach is painted as a bad guy. He was the idol worshiper. And I think one can argue, I would argue, that when you paint Terach as a worshiper, that was a means to accentuate the greatness of his son Avraham, who broke from him. But that's not what the literal text tells us. The literal text portrays Terach very positively. We're told at the end of Perek Yud Aleph that Terach, after one of his sons, Avraham's brother Haron, died, that Terach, the grandfather, adopt Haron's son, Avram's grandson. He adopts Lot. That's so very, very noble. And we're also told in that very text that Terach, without being told by God to do so, he emigrates to Eretz Yisrael on his own. He doesn't get there, but he sets out to go there. And no less a commentary than the Seforno points out that Terach sensed that there was something unique about Eretz Yisrael. And say what one wants to say about Terach, he is the father and the grandfather and the great-grandfather and the great-great-grandfather of every single one of the Avot and Imahot. That's not bad. The reverse is true. Terach was in his own way a tzaddik. He adopts his grandson Lot after Lot's father Haran, Terach's son, Avram's brother, dies. On his own initiative, Terach, without being commanded by God, begins his journey to Canaan, recognizing its spiritual loftiness, and he seeds all of the matriarchs and patriarchs. He's the roots. Let me tell you something about roots of trees. They're never seen. We generally don't see the roots of trees. They're beneath ground, but they're so essential to a tree's health. Much like Terach, they're unseen, unnoticed, but they're critical to the birth of whatever they're introducing, and they deserve acclaim. And with all of the progress that Jofa has made, I think one of its greatest credits that it's never forgotten its roots. It's never forgotten those who have seeded the seeds of Jofa, of the women's movement, going all the way back to I mentioned again, to the blues of this world, to the Belle de Lindenbaum of blessed memory, to all the wonderful, wonderful women who at great, great risk raise a voice that said our voices, our concerns must be heard. And so that's the fourth expansion. So let me again summarize. The first expansion to Shmuel's position, is we were not only freed physically, but it's a spiritual endeavor. The second expansion, the centrality of Eretz Yisrael. The third expansion, the whole story is the story of leadership. It begins from the fringe. That's the way it is. That's the way it is. And the fourth is the fourth story of always trying to remember those who were there in the first place. And then there's a fifth expansion. We're told in the pasuk, which is quoted, Terach avi Avraham va'avi Nachor. Terach was the father of Avraham and the father of Nachor. I wonder about this. Why is Nachor mentioned? Generally, Avram is mentioned with Yitzchak and Yaakov. He's not mentioned with Nachor. Why is he mentioned here with Nachor? Usually, again, unmentioned. I would say the following, that while Avraham is the father and the grandfather, as is Sarah, the mother and the grandmother, but Avraham is the father. Abraham is the father of the Avot. He is the first Av, and then from him comes Yitzchak. He is basically the grandfather of the patriarchs of Isaac and Jacob. Nachor is the grandfather and the great-grandfather of the matriarchs of Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah. And precisely because the matriarchs are of equal importance, hence the critical mention of their direct ancestor. And that direct ancestor was not, the direct ancestor, Abraham, is not the direct ancestor of Rivka and Rachel and Leah. No, that was Nachar. That's why I think you have that juxtaposition in Perek Chav Bet, after the Avram story, which is basically the story how Yitzhak is going to be the covenantal heir. You have those psukim that were told, hey, by the way, Nachar also had children, Betuel, and from Betuel came Rivka, and after Rivka comes Rachel and Leah, who comes from, who basically are her nieces. Rivka's nieces are Rachel and Leah. It's remarkable. That too is an expansion. V'kach terach avi Avraham v'avi Nachor, and then we're told v'kach et avichem et Avraham me'eva na'ar v'olech oto b'chol eretz Kenan ve'arbe et zaro ve'atein lo et Yitzchak ve'atein li Yitzchak et Yaakov ve'esav. I don't want to make it too complicated, but I always wondered here, when Yitzchak is mentioned, his twin sons are mentioned, Yaakov and Esav. And Haggadah goes out of its way, quoting this pasuk, to tell us that Esav wanders off to Seir, while Yaakov goes to Egypt, from where he would come to Eretz Yisrael. So it delineates why Yaakov is going to be the third patriarch and Esav. But after Yitzchak, it doesn't point out, when it says V'atein lo et Yitzchak, it doesn't then point out why it's Yitzchak and not Yishmael. And here what I really want to say is that the struggle as to who would be the second covenantal heir, Yitzchak and Yishmael, is not really a struggle between the two of them. It's a struggle between who would be the first matriarch. Would the first matriarch be Sarah, or the first matriarch be Hagar? If it would be Sarah, then it's her son from Abraham who would be the second patriarch, as occurred Yitzchak. If it would be Hagar, then it would be the son born from Hagar and Abraham, Yishmael, who would be the second patriarch. The truth of the matter is, there's great similarity between Yitzchak and Yishmael. Great similarity. First, they're two of the only figures in the Bible who were named by God. And Yishmael's name sounds like a much better biblical patriarchal name than Yitzchak. The number 12, Yitzchak had 12 tribes as grandchildren. Yishmael had 12 too. But there's a very major difference. That's why when there's such a focus on the Avot, it's a mistake. Brit Avot, it's not just Brit Avot, it's Brit Imahot. Because indeed, the covenant of Avram doesn't take hold without the covenant with Sarah. It's Sarah and not Hagar. And precisely because it couldn't be Yishmael, because Yishmael comes from Hagar, there's no need to even make that claim. Whereas Esav does come, just as Yaakov comes from Yitzchak and Rivka. I hope that was not too complex. I know I was jumping, but in summary, this second paragraph, which we read very carefully, there's a lot of depth to it. It adds these dimensions. Freedom, one, is not only freedom from, but freedom to. I guess there's still in me, the classroom, that there's always a summarizing. And number two, not only freedom to Sinai, Torah, but it's freedom to Eretz Yisrael. We are Am Yisrael, Al Pi Torat Yisrael, Be'eretz Yisrael. And thirdly, Be'eva HaNahar. It wasn't so simple. We started from the fringe. Avram was a fringe guy. So was Sarah, a fringe gal. Very fringy. Everything starts from the fringe. Everything. When Achav says to Eliyahu, you're a troublemaker. Look what you believe in, your lone voice. You learn from there that if somebody calls you a troublemaker, it's a big compliment. Big compliment to be called a troublemaker. Remember, the key principle of spiritual activism is not to do the popular thing. Can you do the right thing? Can you become involved in a cause, not that you're sure you're going to win, but even if you're not so sure, you're going to take the risk. And the fourth is that it's terach, not just Avraham. You got to give honor to the seeds. So very, very important. To the seeds, to the roots. We don't see the roots, but without them the tree would fall. Kol hakavod, as I said to Jofa that has done that. Vavi Nachor. Nachor was very important. He is the bloodline of the Imahot. Not Avram. Avram's not the bloodline. Of course, he's married to Sarah, but Sarah, the children on the women's side, the matriarchal side, is not, of course, not from Avram nor from Sarah, but from Nachor, deserves mention. And as we said, the sixth expansion is understanding why, as much as Avram loved Yishmael, he loved Yishmael for a long time, and Avram had to be taught, love Yishmael, but he's not the covenantal heir. And he's not the covenantal heir because his real wife, the covenantal wife, was not Hagar. It was Sarah. I think for a while Avram thought maybe it is Hagar. Maybe it's for that reason that after Sarah dies, he probably remarries Hagar. The very name Hagar comes from the word Hager. Brit ben Abtarim, Geri Zaracha, Beretz Lo Lahem. This paragraph, just a few lines, it's so full of meaning. I just want to add one other point. I don't want to stop here. I want to say a word about what happens after Shulchan Aruch. We've just touched upon a small piece of what happens before the meal, the story of the past. We haven't even gotten into the learning of the past. But after the meal, we begin the story of the future. And in no small measure, it begins after Shulchan Aruch with the story of Eliyahu Hanavi opening the door. Now why? Why bring Eliyahu Hanavi into the Seder? Well, my sense is it's because the Navi says, Hinei anochi sholech lachem et Eliyahu Hanavi. Eliyahu will be the harbinger of the coming of the Mashiach. And since what happens after the meal is going to shed its beam, its prism on the future, that's why we begin with this story. It's a story not only of a talk of that past redemption, which we've just discussed in somewhat detail in the story of Rav, but that hope for the future, Geula. I want to say something deep about this. When our son Dovi was a little boy, now thank God our Dovi he was raised in the Bet Midrash. Now he's a great scholar. And I love learning with Dov. What I've learned from my Dov is I'm no scholar. He's a scholar. And when we learn together, I start with Rashi, he starts with the Septuagint, the Vulgate, and he once said to me, Abba, I love you, but we read a text, I'm trying to find out what the text means. You're trying to give meaning to the text. He's the real deal. Finished a book on the right to protest God, and now he's finishing a book with thousands of footnotes on the place of hell in Judaism. Quite something. Anyway, when he was a little boy, he used to say, Abba, why do we have to open the door for Eliyahu? I mean, he's flying all over the world. He flies over the Atlantic in an instant. He even does it on Pesach. He drinks all that wine, even though he drinks a little bit of wine, it adds up in every house. He doesn't get drunk. Why doesn't he come through the cracks? What do we have to open the door for him? And it's actually in the writing of Rav Kook, where Rav Kook says, if we want the Mashiach to come, we better get off our hands and open the door. You know, there are some people who read the book of redemption after the Haggadah, which is the Shir HaShirim. We're in the Song of Songs, Perek, Kol Dodi Dofek. The voice of our beloved is knocking. God, maybe the Mashiach is knocking at the door, as the Rav explicates in his Kol Dodi Dofek, knocking, knocking. But we're getting to the door too late. There's something to it. As much as we're waiting for redemption, maybe redemption is waiting for us. As much as we seek the Messiah, maybe the Messiah is seeking us. As much as we're searching for God, maybe God is searching for us. That's how we begin that section of the Haggadah after the meal. And then we start with the Hallel HaMitzri. We start singing the Hallel, which is the hope of the redemption of the Jewish people. Yivarech et Bet Yisrael. In the future, bless the people of Israel. It talks about that hope of Jewish redemption, which we're experiencing in our times, the establishment of the Jewish state. And then for those who wonder, we're so exhausted after the meal, why are we starting to daven Shacharis, Nishmat Kol Chai, one of the longest prayers? Why? Because we move from the hope of the future Jewish redemption to the hope of the redemption of the world. Judaism is one of the most universal religions. Redemption comes not only when the Jewish people are enveloping the time of peace, but the whole world is enveloping that same era. Uva'u kol ha'ovdim me'eretz Ashur, v'ishtachavu l'Hashem b'har HaKodesh, when all will come universally to worship the Almighty. That's why we sing Nishmat Kol Chai Tevarech et Hashem. A strong sense of national identity, a strong sense of understanding who we are as Jews, does not contradict our universal consciousness, but is a prerequisite to it. I'm proud of Israel, not only because of its record in what it has done for Am Yisrael, but I'm so proud of Eretz Yisrael because it tries to be for others universally who are in need. That is so very, very central. And it's only after Nishmat Kol Chai that the Seder officially closes, Chasal Sidur Pesach, and we sing and we offer songs of liberation, songs of joy. One final word. These have been very difficult times, these past 2 years, granted, but they're remarkable times. I've always wondered, would there ever be a movement like the Soviet Jewry movement, where young people were so energized to be out there in the streets? We've seen it in past years. We've seen it in America, with all that we're facing. We've seen it in Israel. I'm wearing again these dog tags, these army tags of our grandsons, as I've mentioned, who are on the front lines, One of them, Amichai, I said to him recently, he's in Lotar, Lochamei Terra. They are trained to be part of SWAT teams, no simple task. He said, Sabi, what do you think? I said, Amichai, I wish you wouldn't have to be a fighter. You can go into intelligence. You can be a cook. It's just as holy in the army, whatever you do. And he said to me, I don't understand, Sabi. Grandfather, you wanted my older brothers to be fighters. You were okay if I yell at my older sister would be a fighter. Why can't I be a fighter? I said, Amichai, that was 10 years ago, 12 years ago, even 7 years ago. I've done my worrying. I've done my share, enough. And he said to me, Sabi, you've done your share. Now I've got to do my share. What a people we have. I want to encourage you with all of the heaviness of the losses that we've had, and we've had losses. David Schwartz, my goodness, his mother gets up at his funeral and she quotes Bruria, Hashem Natan v'Hashem Lakach, and she stops. And I felt connected enough to her during Shiva. I said, you said God gives, God takes, but you didn't quote the end. May the name of God be blessed. She said, I couldn't say it. I gained so much respect for her. The honesty, the candor, the love of God, where one can say, I'd like you to do better, God. Please do better. It's not that we haven't taken hits, Yakir and Yossi Hershkowitz. We all know the Ma'ozes. We all know of the losses. Yitzhak Blue's grandson, who suffered such a terrible injury, so many operations. But it's been a remarkable time. It's been a remarkable time to declare Dayenu. Dayenu is not only a song in which we say, enough bad things. No, we're saying to God, I want to focus on the good. If you did only this little good thing, Dayenu, Dayenu, Dayenu. That's why we're calling this Haggadah Yehi Or. Given when it was written, it could have been entitled V'choshech al pnei tahom. There's darkness everywhere. Now is the time more than ever, never to give up hope. Never to give up hope. And the way one doesn't give up hope is to talk hope, to write hope, to sing hope, to do hope. Hope, hope, hope. B'emunah shlema, od lo avda tikvatenu, hatikva shnot alpayim. Let this be a Pesach, a Haggadah of Yehi Or, Yehi Or, Yehi Or. If you have any thoughts or questions or teachings, by all means.
Jordana, as host, you probably need to unpin him so that Rav Avi can see the other participants. There you go.
Perfect. Just
Okay.
unpin.
And if anyone has comments, I'm sorry we missed one participant who had a comment, but she had to leave.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Rav Avi. It was inspiring as always. If anybody wants to jump in with any questions, otherwise we can ask Miriam's question and we'll get back to her. But her question was, kind of how do we move from being on the fringe to winning hearts and minds, kind of, I guess, in the mainstream, as it were. And in this case, she was talking about integrating feminism into modern Orthodox Jewish life.
It's first very important not to compromise on one's principles. Extremely important. To remain true to the principles that energized the movement in the first place. Secondly, as best as one can, not, and here I'm talking to myself and letting you listen because I made this mistake so often, not to be critical of the personalities, of the personas of those who are disagreeing with us, to distinguish between them, never to impugn their motives, even if they disagree with us. I don't know what's in the motives of the other person, but to try to distinguish between what they're saying and these individuals as individuals. Again, I'm talking to myself because in the Soviet Jewry movement, I did too much insulting, much too much insulting of the people with whom I disagreed. And even when Marat came into being, I became very upset with the people who excommunicated the shul and put us into cherem. But still, if I had a chance to speak to my Rebbe, Rabbi Soloveitchik, with whom I enjoyed a very wonderful one-on-one relationship, I spoke with him always about these issues. I've never spoken about it, but after I wrote Women at Prayer, the powers to be didn't let me sit with him alone. I guess they were afraid of something. It's very demeaning. But I became angry with, I think it's important to try to distinguish between personalities with whom we disagree and disagreeing on the issues. And thirdly, and this, by the way, I think is the greatness of Sarah Horowitz. You know, I had a dream. It was like a tiny, tiny, tiny little thing. Sarah and Jeff have taken us to another level. What's great about Sarah, separate from her being a Talmidah Chachama and all of that, she carries herself with dignity. She carries herself with such respect for the others who disagree, not disagreeing with the ideas, but showing respect for those individuals. And Jova should recognize that we have made headway. The train has left the station. We've made extraordinary headway. We're seeing women now, talking now about specifically Marat. We're seeing women taking the title of rabbi. God bless them. We're seeing women leading congregations. Voices of modern orthodoxy, the only voice in France and in England and now in Sofia, in Helsinki. We're seeing rabbis who are having women being co-rabbis of synagogues. A lot to be proud of. I'm telling you, Jofa, there would never have been a prenuptial agreement adopted by the RCA were it not for Jofa. There would never be this advanced learning that the OU has been introduced were it not for Jofa. So I think we've succeeded on a great level. I'll close with an interesting story. There's a tape, a beautiful video about leadership. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's called Dancing on a Hilltop. And there's a narrator narrating how somebody is dancing like on a hilltop on a beautiful day. And there are many people who are suntanning on that hilltop. And this person is dancing, and for 15 seconds, which could be an eternity, the narrator says, okay, the person is dancing and dancing and dancing. Nothing. After 15 seconds, which again is an eternity, someone jumps up to dance. So the narrator says, ooh, guess what? Now the first guy, now he's a leader. Before you couldn't call him a leader because no one was dancing with him. Now somebody dancing with him. And then the narrator is narrating for another 15 seconds, 20 seconds, and suddenly a third person gets up to dance. And the narrator says, okay, Why do you think this third person got up to dance? I hope you'll take this in the right spirit it's meant. The third person is getting up to dance not because of the first person. The first person's crazy. Because of the second person. The second person gave it legitimacy. And then after another 15 seconds, when the fourth person gets up to dance, the narrative says, oh, now we have a movement. You know, I've become very close to Haskell Lookstein, and I'm very proud. Our relationship went through ups and downs because he headed the establishment's New York Conference on Soviet Jewry, and I was with the student struggle. And at Chatayani Maskirayon, I didn't understand his greatness. He has real greatness. But Haki used to always say, when people would come to him, I want to do this on the women's issue at KJ, he would say, go to Avi, he likes to be first. I don't want to be first. I always tell Haskell, much of the growth in so many areas is because of him. When we had women's prayer groups, it's true Lincoln Square started it, but it wasn't ongoing in the shul. For 10 years, it was only in our shul. And after 10 years, the help of Miriam Schachter Gampel and the other great, great women, so Belda went to Haskell and read the Riot Act. So Haskell brought it into the shul, and guess what? Within a few months, there were women's prayer groups everywhere. Don't lose hope. A lot to be hopeful for. Not only is there a lot to do, there's a lot to be done. I love the story of Ariel Sharon. He was tending his farm with his son, apparently, and when they finished a day's work, the son said, Dad, I'm so exhausted. Look how much more we have to till. And Sharon said, but look how far we've come. We've come a long distance, and without becoming complacent, I think JOFA is one of the most important organizations anywhere. I remember when we were so criticized, the voice of JOFA, women in these mainstream modern Orthodox shuls, although I consider ourselves mainstream too, that made a great difference. That's the story of the Haggadah. There would have been no Yetziat Mitzrayim were it not Ivri. Take one more thought, one more question. If any of you want a copy of the Haggadah, just if you can let Mindy know, it will be our great pleasure to send it to you. And Mindy, please send my best to your mom, who is a hero in the movement. And I'm so grateful to your family who sponsored Journey to Open Orthodoxy, the book, and I'm forever grateful and so grateful to the time I spent with your father, Alava Shalom.
Thank you.
One of the greats, great light.
Thank you. We are grateful for you today, and thank you everybody for being on. I know those who stayed on extra, thank you. And I hope it gives everybody a lot of inspiration to think about as we go into Pesach. Thank you again, Rav Avi.
And
And
Mindy, much success to you in your
thank you.
holy, holy endeavor.
Thank you.